Oh yeah, it's all
Right,
public,
okay.
yeah.
First, before...
Oh yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, fine,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, we're in public session now. The minutes of the meeting of 28th November have been circulated. Are they agreed? Agreed. Before we commence the main business of today's proceedings, I wish to turn to correspondence. Item 2018-363 A, B and C, email from Ms Cathy Corcoran on behalf of the co-working group of Lower Kimmage Road Residents Association concerning the objections proposed Kimmage Road Lower Bus Connect plans. Please, notice of information about a meeting being held on 29th November and a press release. It is proposed that the committee consider this item of correspondence in the context of our meeting today. If that's agreed, agreed. Correspondence 2018-364, email received from Deputy Noel Rock, dated 28th of November, supporting Captain Murphy's correspondence concerning the request that Football Association of Ireland, Mr John Delaney, appear before us, and also listing additional witnesses that the committee might consider. As agreed, it is proposed to include this matter as a priority item for the committee's business and our work programme in 2019, if that's agreed.
About that now,
Sure, of course, yeah.
Do we agree the work programme and then do the invite?
Whatever.
Or do we do the invite, send the invite or send invites at this stage?
Well, if it's helpful, we can do two things. One, we have a meeting next week for which we have no business, I think, right now. So we could use that as the work programme for the new year. And then the invitations that you're talking about, we could issue them out if we agree that after meeting next week, if that would meet your wishes. Pardon?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, it's Wednesday. Sorry, Wednesday morning next, is it? Sorry, Paul.
So Wednesday morning.
Oh, so because it's the last day of it all. We could have it next Wednesday morning, whatever meeting, whatever the appropriate. Yeah, I think it's what Deputy Murphy, and I appreciate the clerk can't actually, he's given me his advice here privately, as he can only do, is that Wednesday is the last day of the Dáil next week, so we can have a meeting that day, agree our work programme, and then issue the invitations from that meeting to whoever we wish. And if we agree, and I don't think anybody would disagree with what you're saying, the invitations could issue from the meeting next week, if you're happy with that.
Okay.
It covers all the angles, really.
And can I just clarify the meeting next week? I mean, obviously, we're dealing with the piece of legislation tonight that will come before us in time. Presumably that won't be coming.
No, as I understand
right,
it on
okay.
that point, that's a very important point. The Minister was anxious that it would proceed. Members were circulated, and a number of members felt that it should be left till the new year.
Fine.
To give appropriate time to the bill as its importance and issues in relation to their own constituencies and so on. So I was informed yesterday that it will not proceed at committee stage next week, even should it pass by the department, that it even should it pass at all. And I don't know if it will pass tonight anyway or tomorrow.
Right.
So that would leave a vacant time for next week. And if everybody's happy, it won't be a long meeting. We can circulate a proposed working programme for next year, and we can put your request top of that.
Okay. And can I just ask that? I mean, there have been a number of requests from different deputies in relation to the work programme. Yeah. Is there a list of those?
We'll have them.
We'll have them in advance next week. Fine.
Yeah, we'll have that before the meeting, certainly.
Right. That's great.
Okay, so that's that correspondence. Everybody happy with that? Correspondence 2018-365, email from me concerning the airport noise reduction bill. Right, that was just a person wrote to me, so I've circulated to the committee members. And a second email from another gentleman there expressing his views on it, which we circulated to members. And a third letter from another gentleman there, Mr. Eddie O'Keefe. So those persons, just for the clarity, Clara O'Reilly, Conor O'Reilly and Eddie O'Keefe, they're the three people who wrote to me, and we circulated that. It's proposed to consider this item when we get to the committee stage with that bill. Is that agreed? Agreed. Correspondence 2018-368 ABCD, email from Minister Ross, attaching 4 documents in relation to the briefing given by the Department officials concerning the Aircraft Noise Bill, Regulation Bill 2018. Proposed to note that, if that's agreed. Correspondence 2018-369 AB and A. Email received from Mr. Jim Kelly, dated 30th November, concerning Metrolink and attaching an alternative proposal. It's supposed to consider this item in the context of the committee's 2019 work programme. Is that agreed? Agreed. Correspondence 2018-370 AB and A. Oh, sorry, it's A and B, and then A is the first one. Email from Mr. Oisin Kelly on behalf of Ruth Coppinger, dated 4th of December, requesting a meeting of joint committee to consider the bus air and routes, starting with routes 101, 101X and 133, and that also that trade union representatives will be invited. So Deputy Coppinger to discuss. As Deputy Coppinger is not here, that we leave that to the next meeting, is it, or what do we do? We note that correspondence. Correspondence 2018-371, email from Deputy Imelda Munster concerning objections to select committee. That's, and we've referred to that.
You've clarified that
so
it's not going to go ahead. Yeah, okay, fine,
and
thanks.
your correspondence is officially noted. The same from Deputy Murphy, noted, and I think that's it. That's all our correspondence and matters arising. Well, no, they're all done, aren't they? Yeah. Okay, so so the purpose of today's meeting is the committee consideration of the Bus Connect's core bus corridors project. In this regard, I would like to very much welcome our witnesses, Ms. Anne Graham, Chief Executive Officer of the National Transport Authority, and Mr. Hugh Cregan, Deputy Chief Executive Officer of the National Transport Authority. You're both very welcome. And I just have to read, for the purpose of witnesses attending, and in accordance with procedure, I'm required to read, by virtue of Section 17.2.1 of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of the evidence you are to give to the committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter, you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, they should not criticise nor make charge against any person or persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice that members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against either a person outside the Houses or an official, either a name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. And I now invite Ms. Anne Graham, Chief Executive Officer, National Transport Authority, to make her opening statement, please. Thank you. You're very welcome.
Thank you for the invitation to attend. I'm joined by my colleague Hugh Cregan, Deputy CEO of the NTA. I understand that the committee wishes to focus upon the core bus corridor project, which is part of the Bus Connect's Dublin programme. In terms of background, the overall framework for transport provision to meet the needs of the region over the next 2 decades is set out in the Greater Dublin Area Transport Strategy 2016 to 2035, which was approved by the Minister for Transport, Tourism and Sport in 2016. The strategy outlines the various networks to be developed: heavy rail, light rail, bus, road, cycling and pedestrian networks, together with supporting measures including park and ride provision, information provision, integration and demand management measures. The core bus project is outlined in that strategy. Bus Connect's Dublin, which was launched last year, aims to overhaul the current bus system in Dublin region by building a network of new bus corridors on the busiest bus routes to make bus journeys faster, predictable and reliable, completely redesigning the network of bus routes to provide a more efficient network connecting more places and carrying more passengers, developing a state-of-the-art ticketing system using credit and debit cards or mobile phones to link with payment accounts and making payment much more convenient, implementing a cashless payment system to vastly speed up passenger boarding times, revamping the fare system to provide a simpler fare structure, allowing seamless movement between different transport services without financial penalty, providing a number of supporting park and ride facilities, rolling out new bus stops with better signage and information, and increasing the provision of additional bus shelters, and transitioning to a new bus fleet using low-emission vehicle technologies. Bus Connects Dublin is a programme of integrated actions which together will deliver a bus system that will enable more people to travel by bus than ever before, and allowing bus commuting to become a viable and attractive choice for employees, students, shoppers and visitors. The impact of congestion on bus travel. From the perspective of public transport, congestion is a major problem. On the busiest routes, bus lanes are only in place for less than 1/3 of the corridor. This means that for most of the journey, buses are competing for space with general traffic, and so are also affected by the increasing levels of congestion. As a result, whereas bus journeys should be fast, reliable and predictable, the increasing impact of congestion is undermining that objective. Additional buses are being added to the system simply to compensate for delays in journey times. The bus system is important in Dublin because, simply put, it is the main component of the solution to address our current congestion problem and to meet our future transport needs. As Dublin is a low-density city, there are few areas with the size and concentration of population for rail-based public transport. This means that for most corridors in Dublin, bus travel represents the optimum form of public transport. Dublin Bus carried 137 million passengers in 2017. When combined with bus air and commuter services in the Dublin region, 143 million passengers were carried on state-operated bus services in the Dublin area, compared with 38 million on Lewis and 33 million passengers on the Dart and rail commuter services. The Core Bus Corridor project. Overall, the project envisaged the provision of about 230 kilometres of bus lanes on 16 of the busiest bus corridors in Dublin, which we refer to as radial core bus corridors. And these corridors are shown on a map attached to my statement. Our objective is to provide a continuous bus lane in each direction, as well as maintaining 2 general traffic lanes. In addition, we also want to provide a dedicated cycle track on each side of the road, providing safe cycling facilities segregated from other vehicular traffic. The standard layout also includes footpaths for pedestrians and supporting elements such as pedestrian crossings at all key road crossing points and bus shelters for waiting passengers. However, this standard layout is difficult to achieve in practice, and there are a number of challenges that we face in trying to implement this target layout. Difficult decisions will have to be made, and some locations will require more changes than others. Some of the likely impacts that will arise from the Core Bus Corridor project are set out in the following sections. In terms of traffic movement, by creating more priority for buses and cycling, there will be changes to how traffic currently moves around the streets. Some roads may become one-way, new bus-only sections will be introduced, and in some places general traffic will have to take new routes in and out of the city. Acquisition of parts of gardens. Because there is so little unused space along these busy roads, it will often not be possible to accommodate the bus lanes and cycle lanes in the width available. In order to achieve the required space, it will be necessary in places to acquire parts of front gardens and land in front of commercial properties to allow the bus and cycle lanes to be provided. This would require rebuilding new garden walls a short distance back from the existing road boundary. Reduction of on-street parking. Because the roads we are widening travel through residential and business areas, there will be a need to reduce the amount of on-street parking to accommodate the new layout. Removal of trees. As with the need to remove some parts of front gardens and footpaths, there will also be a need to remove trees along some of the corridors. Mitigation. Every feasible option will be looked at to minimise the disruption to people, their properties and the wider local community. Where there is simply no viable alternative and where we know we have to remove trees, portions of gardens or parking, we will ensure appropriate mitigation measures are put in place wherever practical. The benefits of the Core Bus Corridor project. In terms of improving cycling infrastructure, the major bus corridors across Dublin City are also the main cycling arteries. The widening of these roads for bus lanes provides the opportunity to transform the cycling infrastructure at the same time. On each of the 16 radial corridors, our objective is to provide high-quality cycling facilities segregated from the bus lanes and general traffic lanes as far as is feasible. We calculate that over 200 kilometres of cycle tracks lanes will be either built or current lanes improved upon. A better cycling network is good for all transport users. It avoids cyclists sharing bus lanes with buses and will remove many of the conflicts between buses and cyclists. This initiative is the foundation of the overall cycle network that has been planned for the Greater Dublin area. Getting home quicker. The Core Bus Corridor project will deliver on improving journey times and creating certainty and confidence in the bus system. Improving the current journey times on the key bus corridors will make bus travel more attractive, will improve the efficiency of the services and give people the reliability of knowing exactly how long their journey will take. On average, bus journeys will be reduced by up to 40 to 50%. However, in the absence of bus connects, Journey times will continue to get worse and commuters will spend more time travelling to and from work each day. Climate change. We have all heard the recent reports that Ireland is performing poorly in comparison to our European partners when it comes to reducing carbon emissions and meeting our climate change targets. The transport sector in Ireland is the largest fuel consumer in the economy at 33%, and the sector with the largest share of energy-related CO2 emissions at 35%. It is vital that we move more people from cars onto sustainable transport, which is a key component in reducing CO2 emissions, in addition to addressing congestion with all its adverse environmental impacts. Supporting the economy and jobs. A well-functioning public transport system is a basic requirement for any metropolitan area that aspires to provide plenty of good employment opportunities for its people into the future. With bus, rail and trams, Dublin boasts some really great services, but if we are to maintain our capacity as a city, a region and a capital to continue to attract the best jobs and the best employers, we will have to do more and urgently. By improving the overall public transport offering, these proposals will make commutes shorter and more reliable and will therefore make Dublin a more attractive location for employers. It will also make it easier for people to get out and enjoy the city and all it has to offer, which is good news for businesses in the city centre and beyond. Public consultation is being undertaken in 3 phases. Phase 1 consists of 4 corridors and consultation commenced on the 14th of November and will continue until February 2019. Consultation will commence in January on Phase 2 and in February on Phase 3. All property owners potentially affected by the proposals will be notified by post in advance of the public consultation, and a one-to-one meeting will be offered with each of those impacted. The NTA is establishing a community forum for each corridor where there will be an opportunity for a representative from residents' associations, community groups, public representatives and interested groups to get informed and engaged during the public consultation process. A series of public information meetings will be held in venues along the corridors. Written submissions and observations on Phase 1 corridors may be made online at www.busconnects.ie or via post to the Core Bus Corridor Project at the NTA's offices or by email to cbc@busconnects.ie. That concludes my introductory statement and I trust that I can answer any queries that arise.
Thank you very much for your opening statement. It's a huge issue. It obviously affects many members who are not even members of this committee, particularly people who live in Dublin City, and I know if there's an issue in Limerick and transport as well. So I just want to, as I said at the beginning, just for clarity, that I will take members of the committee first, and after that I'll take them, as I will announce, we have a list here. Deputy Shortall, you will be in, I'm including you as a committee member because you're an official substitute. You've been informed to us. I'll take, Deputy Rock is first.
Thank you, Chair. Anne, Hugh, let's face it, we've seen a lot of each other over the last number of months. I've seen more of you than I've seen of my family at this rate, which perhaps illustrates the scale of your ambitions to transform transport both in the city and across the country. That's to be lauded. There's no question about that. The broad scale and scope of these plans is to be lauded. The idea of trying to anticipate the challenges, the demands and the needs of public transport right across Dublin City is something I believe to be lauded, and I want to state that from the outset. There are a number of challenges, though, within that. Some general in terms of the process, some more local. I'll start with the general concerns and problems that I have. The first question being, why the staggered consultation? Why has there been a consultation on the routes in the first instance, then followed by the core bus corridors, which in itself is divided into 3 phases. Phase 1 beginning in November, ending in February. Phase 2 beginning in January, ending in March. And Phase 3 beginning in February and ending in April. This leads us to a difficult situation as public representatives where we are effectively deciding and debating and working with constituents in an information vacuum. We don't know the exact scale of the plans for the core bus corridor from Ballymun to City Centre, for example, or from Finglas to Phibsborough, for example. Yet we're expected to adjudicate and make our arguments in relation to the Swords to City Centre one, which passes through Santry Village, in an effective vacuum of information. So it would be my suggestion and my feedback at this early stage that we should extend the deadline for Phase 1 so that people can make their adjudications, make their observations, and make their decisions in a cohesive, holistic way. And I'd appreciate if you'd consider that. Again, I'd reiterate the question of why is the corridor consultation going ahead without knowing the revised routes? Obviously, the routes as proposed in your draft plan a few short months ago solicited a huge, unprecedented volume of feedback. I believe some 30,000 pieces of feedback. This, naturally, I would assume, will lead to some revisions of the draft plans. I met with Dublin Bus yesterday, and they certainly left me under no illusion that there will be revisions to the draft plans. If there are revisions to the draft plans, it would seem fair to posit that there are potentially going to be knock-on effects for the core bus corridors as well. And again, we're somewhat adjudicating and giving feedback in a vacuum there, based on an old draft route plan where we don't have access and are not privy to the current draft route plan. So I'd like to ask when that's going to be released, and if it will be released in time for the current consultation deadline as it stands. In terms of the consultation meetings themselves, Deputy Shorthall hosted a meeting last night of some 20+ resident associations. One of the suggestions that came forward very clearly at that was the idea of splitting the consultation meeting, which is due to take place in January 8th, for there to be a swords consultation and a separate and distinct Santry consultation. It's clear that there are quite a number of interested bodies in Santry, and it's clear that potentially the issues that are facing outside the M50 and the issues that are facing inside the M50 on that 12-kilometre bus corridor route are somewhat separate and somewhat distinct. And I think with respect to your time and with respect to the time of public representatives and indeed residents, it would actually be more beneficial to split that consultation into 2 meetings. So I'd appreciate your feedback on that. There has been a meeting, as we know, set for January 8th for the Swords to City Centre bus corridor. I would be curious to know if there are any intentions for additional meetings at this stage. A number of the resident associations will be going to you with questions, much like I'm going to you with questions right now. And I think it would be useful and beneficial to have a second round of that consultation before the conclusion of the date. Finally, my general question is, what are the terms of reference with regard to the consultations? A number of residents last night were concerned at the lack of published terms of reference with regard to these consultations. I understand that you're intending to publish some and you're working on some now. I'd appreciate if we could have maybe a date for that. I'd be grateful for that.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Walker. Take Senator O'Mahony. No questions, okay. I go now to Sinn Féin. There's no Fianna Fáil member being present. Deputy Munster.
Thanks, Speaker. Look, just in relation to the written submissions, I think there was somewhat in the region of 30,000. It was reported, and I'm just wondering, have you done a broad categorisation of those submissions? Where, you know, for example, accessibility to routes or corridors, or you know, relating to electric vehicles, disabilities, all that sort of broad kind of categorisation, and do you intend to make that available to us? The other one was any plan changes on foot of the submissions. You haven't said a whole lot about the written submissions. If we could have just a brief update on that, and whether there were many changes that you intend making and that sort of thing. The other deputy there had made reference to the terms of reference regarding the consultation. I'd be interested in just seeing those two. And just in relation to, because it's a very contentious issue for the residents that are directly affected with the gardens, etc. Have they been identified as yet, and have they been? I know you've said that that you will be in touch with them, but have they been identified or notified, or has there been any engagement whatsoever with them at first? Because I'm sure they're very anxious at this stage. And I'm going to leave it over the rest of my time to my colleague there now, Desi.
I just want to stick to members of the committee first.
Right, all right,
I think, in fairness, I want to go around members first, and then I'll go into the first. This is what I was trying to avoid. We have Deputy Shortall was an official nominee of Deputy Murphy, if that's okay. Yeah, if that's
Yeah, I
reasonable.
was going to share my
I'm
time.
not
Yeah,
trying to
yeah, it's
exclude
okay. No, it's all right. It's no problem.
So, Deputy Shortall then.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks for the presentation, Anne. I just think it's interesting that the 3 TDs representing Dublin North West are here today in attendance, and it's a measure of just how important this whole issue is to the residents of Dublin North West. And I think that's the case because Dublin North West is the only constituency in the Greater Dublin area that is entirely dependent on buses. So we're very familiar with buses, and down through the years those bus services have been honed time and time again to suit local need. So I think it's true to say that we're in a situation where we have an excellent bus service in the Dublin North West area. We need more buses in the morning peak, but apart from that, it's an excellent service. It provides fantastic access to people to various parts of the city, and also the residential areas are very well served, and that's really important because there's a very large older population in that constituency, and indeed many people with disabilities as well. So there's very good access in all respects. And with any major project like this, obviously there's winners and losers, but you know, I think when it comes to the Dublin North West area, there would actually be more losers than winners under these proposals. And, you know, that's not what it was supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about improving bus services for everybody in journey times and so on and so forth. And we know from the analysis on this, and indeed from Anne's presentation here today, that the big problem in the Greater Dublin area as regards public transport is traffic congestion. And I don't know why you're not dealing with that in a more radical way. Why do you have to change the routes? I can't understand that. As I say, from the point of view of certainly the northwest part of the city, the routes are very good as they are at the moment. But what is needed is greater priority to be given for those routes, and more road space being provided. So I just wonder, have you looked in any detail at the possibility of restricting traffic while maintaining the existing bus routes that are there, which are very popular? I just wonder why you haven't taken that approach. Now, when you came out with the proposals on the network, as others have said, there was a huge reaction to that, and it was mainly because what was being proposed would result in a poorer service than people enjoy at the moment, and that's not something that people will accept. But people expected, I think, that there would be an outcome from that first round of consultation on the network before you would get into the business of looking at the corridors, because the decisions in relation to the network will dictate where the corridors are going to go. And because you haven't done that and come back to the public with a response on the proposed changes to the network, this is being seen then as a fait accompli, that you're actually not listening to what the 30,000 people have said to you, and that you're ploughing ahead with the original plan. And that doesn't inspire confidence in people in terms of the consultative process being meaningful. So can you explain to us why you haven't completed the first round before you get into the detail of proposed bus corridors? And for example, at the moment, all buses going down the Swords Road and Condra Road, they all serve O'Connell Street. Maybe they shouldn't all serve O'Connell Street, but under your plans, none of them will serve O'Connell Street any longer. That will have serious implications, obviously, for shoppers, for people who want to get into the area around O'Connell Street. It will also have implications for the business community on the north side of the city, which is struggling as it is. But certainly if you're going to bring about a situation where people have poorer access to those shopping areas in the north side of the city, I don't see how that's a win for anybody. So as part of that plan, you're talking about running all those buses down Gardner Street and away from the city centre. And now you're consulting on having a corridor down Gardner Street. So does that mean that you're assuming the Gardner Street network changes are going ahead? You understand where people are concerned about this. They think that it is a fait accompli. So we need an explanation on why it is that we don't wait until we have the outcome of the first round. The other thing then that's been raised already in relation to the forums, certainly for the entire route of corridor, there are many, many different local issues affecting people on those proposals. And it seems that it would be entirely unwieldy and ineffective to try and just have one forum for a long corridor like the Swords corridor. And the request is that you would split that you would have one forum for the route within the M50 and one for the area outside of the M50. And I'd hope that you might accede to those requests. The other concern, obviously, is about what these forums are about. Are they actually just about kind of going through the motions of giving people a platform, or are they actually going to mean something in terms of people having an input where they can impact on the proposed changes? So we'd like to hear a bit more about the role of those forums, what the terms of reference are, and is it actually going to be possible for people who engage in those forums to effect any change, or is it just about the detail of a proposal that has already been kind of set in stone? The other point I want to raise is just a concern that I was raised with me today from the Dublin Cycling Campaign, who are extremely critical of the cycling proposals that you're making. And they're alleging that those proposals don't meet any of the international standards in relation to safe cycling. And they're looking for a meeting with you, which seems absolutely reasonable. I mean, if there is going to be this investment in providing new cycling facilities, they're desperately needed in the city. I mean, cycling is a very precarious activity at the moment. That shouldn't be the case. We should be doing everything we possibly can to make cycling easier and safer for people. But, you know, those people who are the regular cyclists who are involved in the campaign are saying that the standards that you're using are just not acceptable. And they're looking to meet with you separately. They've been told they can only kind of engage with you through the forums, and that strikes me as not acceptable at all. If the standards that you're using are not up to scratch, well then surely that's an issue that should be dealt with from the very start, and I would appeal to you to agree to an early meeting with the Dublin Cycling Campaign. Thanks, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Deputy. Deputy Humphreys has been here, Senator Humphreys was here first, actually, before myself. So, but I know, Deputy Ryan, you have, I think you were speaking Scotland at all. Is that the issue you'd like?
No, I'll fit in with your chair.
No,
I mean, with the climate committee next door is my problem, but yeah, whatever works for you.
Okay, well, so.
Yeah, well, if Eamon wants to go ahead of me, I'm fine.
Just because I'm in the climate committee. And just to follow up what Deputy Shorter was saying, because there is real concern among the cycling community when we're starting to look at some of the details. And there's always this fear that it would be forgotten about. To give examples, when you're cycling from Malahide Road into town, basically the Clongriffin one, from my mind, I think the Santry detour are all benefits heading in the right direction. But when you're coming to the key point, when you're heading downhill into Fairview onto the main road, we're saying there are no cyclists. You have to divert off the main road here, and you have to cross over a multi-lane highway and actually take some sort of detour route. I just don't think cyclists would do it, and I don't think they should have to do it. I think we should not be always the solution where we've got tight pinch points is remove the cyclist. I'll give you a second, more local example from my own constituency, an area I know well, the Rathmines Main Street. As was revealed yesterday from the latest draft drawings we've seen, is that if you're coming into town, people would know it, you come to just near the Tesco there, the Garda station, it's expected then that you would go around the houses, literally, around the schools, and take a 2.1, I measured this morning on Google Earth, it would take 2.1 kilometres to get you to Camden Street, or near the George Bernard Shaw pub, if people know it. We always go by pub directions. Instead of, it's a 1 kilometre direct route. And the Rathmines Main Street, for anyone who knows it, is the cycling superhighway in the city. The thought that we would remove cyclists from Rathmines Main Street beggars belief, in my mind, and I can't, and this has been mentioned at various stages through the consultation process. I cannot believe that approach has been taken. And there are numerous other examples that concern some cyclists that we did a good design on the existing Clontarf cycle route in terms of how we treated with bus shelters and at junctions. And that design has been, there seems to be different solutions in each of the 4 designs that have been put out publicly so far on those sort of issues as to how you integrate cyclists with bus stops and at junctions. And it's just to raise that concern. And lastly, I suppose, just the general point, the general level of urban design, the NTA say that they're very, and I'm very supportive of Bus Connect's project, but they say it's going to be an opportunity to improve urban design, kind of tree plantation, greening of streets and so on. But none of the designs that have come out so far have that element within the design. This should be an opportunity to create beautiful streets, not multi-lane highways, which is, I fear, the direction the NTA is going. It's all about as much lanes as you can need the direction. That doesn't necessarily make for good streets. And I have a concern that that's not identified in the design so far.
In fairness to the NTA in previous meetings, I've asked them that very question, and they are committed to strategic improvements in the urban environment, apart from the physical changes that will happen because of the new routes that there will be. Sorry, I take Deputy Humphrey. Sorry, Senator, have you promoted me again? Senator Humphrey.
I have no argument to promote me whatsoever. And I was going to also raise in relation to the Mines route of actually lengthening a route for the cyclists will actually only discourage more cyclists off the road, and not necessarily increasing the number of people using the bikes. Look, you have a problem in relation with this. Is the first mappings that came out in relation to the corridors came out in June. Then we went back into June, July, and then we went into the bus routes, and now we're back to the corridors. And then we had a press release from Dublin Bus, and mentioning in it is, and Deputy Shortall kind of referred to it, saying the routes are not connected to the corridors. They're separate and different consultation process. But like, there's no point putting a corridor where there's not going to be bus routes. They're interconnected. So we needed to see, in my mind, we need to see the outcome from the consultation in relation to the routes before we say definitely exactly where corridors are and how they're going to run. Deputy Rock mentioned in relation to the length of corridors and public forums. If you're having a single public forum on, say, Bray to the city centre, a whole range of different problems in different sections of the route, similar to what's happening on the north side, and I think that has to be taken into consideration. I think we, as a committee and as public representatives, we need to know a lot more information in relation to community forums. Will there be independent chairs? For an example, that level of information we need to understand, because if you're going to build up trust in the community, that level of information needs to be put out there. So we need to be able to tell people, you know, that they're independent chairs. I could see an element of very long corridors of maybe 3 or 4 different community groups, community forums, then meeting on a monthly basis as a super group to look at the whole corridor. But I think they need to be broken down into smaller sections. The whole issue of design, and you know, I totally accept that we need to get more from our bus network in the city. So we need those improvements, but they have to be interconnected and related. So it has to be about urban design, street design. I was involved in a consultation process there recently in relation to Cambridge Road and Ringsend, and there's a possible bus corridor at one end and a cycle route at the other, yet we're only looking at a very narrow stretch of maybe 1.5 kilometres. And when the consultation, when you're asked on either end, well, that's Bus Connect and that's NTA in relation to the cycling network. So there's a sense out there, there's a lack of joined up thinking, especially when you're looking at small sections of development and not knowing exactly what's going to happen in there. Like, I'd like to know, for example, you know, SUDS, are you taking sustainable urban drainage in relation to that, and what level of consultation consultant is? We've got the carbon sinks in relation to our trees and to particles from diesel engines. You know, have we looked, or have you commissioned studies in relation to that on the roads and streets that are affected, even down to into plantation, what you plant along these routes have a huge effect in relation to how quickly particles are distributed away from streets, because it's interrelated to airflow. And the big issue for a lot of people is, when will people know? Like I would have been in contact with an awful lot of people that now are frozen stiff. They were either about to sell their homes or had gone sale agreed. They were right-sizing. Families were actually moving properties to suit the family size. But they're now frozen. They can do nothing because there's a corridor and a possibility that their gardens were going, so they can't move on. So I know you're saying when the letters are issued, but that's still at the beginning of a consultation process. You know, just because you get a letter, if you're truly consulting on the corridor, there may be changes. So there's a real need for a very clear understanding for everybody that's on a corridor, you know, the start date and then the markers in between. And the commitment from yourselves, Anne and Hugh, that you have the resources within the NTA. And I think you need to come very clearly whether you have those resources and what they are to take on such major projects. Because you've got the bus corridors, you've got the routes, and you've got the metro, the Metrolink, all very, very large infrastructural proposals. And what are your resources in relation to that? I have a sense of fear in relation to Metrolink and the bus corridors in relation to Ranelagh, Rathmines and Milltown. Each one will have a major impact on the other, and how is that joined up thinking is going. The big elephant in the room, and I've raised it a number of times for you, Hugh, and you've mentioned the cost, but I think I need a lot more information, is why is congestion tolling not being discussed in relation to this? You know, if cars are on the road that are part of the problem, and we're putting such a huge investment into public transport, why are we not also considering or putting the consultation in relation to congestion tolling? It has operated and worked well in other cities. Why are we not, or where are we in relation to considering that? And just, you know, finishing up on this, there's residents in the Lower Kimmage Road, Nutley, Terranure, and you can keep on naming on the south side and the north side, that has lost confidence in the process because of the lack of information at early stages. Not very many of their questions could be answered. There's a need to move on for much more detailed engagement. Community forums are fine, but when you're talking about an impact on a particular road, and if you take the Lower Kimmage Road or you take Nutley Lane, there's a need to actually meet the residents that are living on that section of the road, because they will have far more detailed questions than somebody on a longer route that's not been impacted. And I still think there's an information deficit out there. I'm still coming across rows of houses that have no understanding that there's a possibility of a bus route there. And when they rang your offices, or the auctioneer has rang the office, they said, no, that's an indicative line. So there's no clarity. And I'll give you the example of that would have been the 15, it's the Rings End to the city centre where you have an indicative line, sorry, it's not 15, it's 16, that has an indicative line on Pigeon House Road. Now, an indicative line means that, you know, 90-odd families just don't know whether they should be engaging in the process or not. But the auctioneers are now highlighting, if a house goes up for sale, that there's an indicative line with no plan, no detail. And, you know, it's a huge issue of concern. So, if you know, I'm not going to ask you any more questions at this stage because I know Desi's waiting to get in there.
Byrne, and then Deputy Ellis, and then Deputy Lahart.
Thanks very much indeed, Chair, and thank you for allowing me to attend the meeting today. I suppose it's not about Dublin, unfortunately, the questions that I'm going to raise, but it's issues that are facing the bus service in Limerick City. And the main bus that is concerned is the 304 and the 304A. And they serve from one side of the city, mainly the Dúrdoyle-Raheen area, the whole way over to Castletroy. And there are two areas of rather large population. And each morning, even at off-peak times, the bus arrives anything between 15 and 23 minutes late on a daily basis. And certainly on the way back in the evening times, there's a similar time lapse. And there are many people that are working or living in the city centre one side, travelling to the other side for work or for various different reasons. There's a number of issues as well in terms of the real time and the app. The timings never seem to be coordinated with the arrival time of the bus. And this is from listening and speaking with people that use the bus on a daily basis. If you check the app on the phone, it says the bus might arrive in 2 minutes, 3 minutes. It mightn't arrive for half an hour. And there is certainly a time lapse between the information that's on both the app and the real-time information. Also, in terms of the LEAP card, there's very little places that you can actually top up your LEAP card, and unless you're from Limerick, you know the different places that you can go to top it up. There isn't any information there, and for people that are maybe tourists or people visiting the city who are from other cities around Ireland who have a LEAP card, it's very hard to find the information where to top up your LEAP card, and you have to go to several places. People find they have to go to several places before they're able to do that. And I was speaking to one man recently, and he told me that from one side of from the city centre where he lives to Castletroy, outside in Troy Studios where he works, he lost 40 minutes recently in his journey time in one direction, and that's an awful loss. But yet there's a private bus operator, and they seem to be able to get people there in time. So I'm not quite sure what the problem is. Also, there's a big issue, and this is possibly something more for the council than yourselves, of bus stops constantly being parked in and not being policed. And also, at the weekends, on a Sunday and bank holidays, the buses don't come certainly as frequently as what they're advertised. And the other thing is that I suppose the big issues are that it's not reliable, it's not a reliable service. And I'm jealous listening to, I suppose, the communication that's gone on here to do with Bus Connects and the amount of information and the consultation that's gone on.
In fairness to you, I'm happy that you raised the issues.
And I just have one more,
okay,
if that's one other thing. And it's Corbally in Limerick. It's an area of high population, and to go from there out to the Crescent Shopping Centre, it used to service 5 or 6 schools. That route was completely cancelled without consultation. It has never been replaced, and it's just I know that you mightn't be able to answer these questions today, but certainly if you could come back, because it is an issue. And I mean, Limerick is the 3rd largest city, and certainly we need a plan and we need a consultation service. Thank you.
Thank you. I think in fairness, you did ask me, could you raise issues, and I said, I mean, nobody has objected to you raising those, and I could ask them maybe that TNT can get back to you directly, separately from today, if that's because they wouldn't be familiar, or but if that's okay.
That's
so
fine,
I'll call, Deputy Ellis now, please.
I'd like to thank you and Anne for coming here, and I suppose my area is probably taken. The corridors that are most affected in our area is taken in the Swords, the Finglas, Glasnevin and the Ballymonte city centre, which have huge impacts. And as previously been said, while we do have complaints, we have a generally reasonably good bus service in most of these areas. And this is a big worry to me, because when I see that we have no feedback from all the consultations, I put in a large amount of submissions, a lot of other people put in, and I've no feedback to see what's coming from that. And then we're now moving on to the corridors. And then when we're finished with this corridor, we're moving on to the next corridor, and then to the next corridor. I mean, this process, I go back to the Metro North process, and we had 3 routes there, and we debated these left and right, up, you know. I was at that many meetings with residents and yourselves and others, and I just wonder, you know, we keep being told that the Metro North is moving ahead, and that's the consultation was supposed to start towards the end of this year or early next year. And then we have this coming in on top of the Metro North. And it seems to me like it would have been a far wiser situation to sort out, if we're committed to the Metro North, to look at that, to bring that forward, look at what spins off from that in terms of what's required, because that's going to have huge impacts in terms of what you're planning to do with Bus Connects. I have real worries about the houses and the gardens, and we haven't seen yet what the repercussions are, particularly at Hart's Corner there, where you'll have Finglas Glasnevin coming and you'll have Ballymun City Centre. And what happens when we do meet resistance? I know you're going to CPO, but what happens when someone's digging in their heels? Are we going to go in and force them to do it? I'm not sure how this is going to work. I really don't know how you're going to, if you do meet resistance, and you're going to meet resistance. Unlike with the Metro North, we're planning to go mostly underground. So the effects, while there's effects in certain areas, and we've had all the arguments with the different...
Sorry, just to listen to
yeah.
the speaker, please. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
No, to listen to you.
But we were largely going underground with Metro North. And while there would be disruption, there's no way the disruption in comparison to what's going to be happening here. So I have serious issues in terms of what I have seen is over the last while, we're going on this ambitious Bus Connects, and we're moving in the direction of privatisation with Dublin Bus, with 10% of routes gone and more in the pipeline. And I'll give you an example with the 17A that's recently been privatised, and all I've got is complaint after complaint now about it. And I knew it was coming. It was inevitable that once these were privatised, we were going to have this. The 220, the 17A, and the complaints are already coming in. And I can see more. And yet we're going down looking at this whole ambitious thing of doing these Bus Connects and these new corridors. I'm not sure. I think maybe that the wisest thing would have been to push along with the Metro North, get that over the line. What are we going to do? In January, we're going into another series of debates on the Metro North. Is that the plan? So on top of all what's going on, then we're into another round. I find the whole thing is a mess. I just feel, you know, we all want to see a proper bus service. We want to see an improvement. I believe in a public transport system. But I'm just confused as to why this is all happening the way it's happening and the sequences, because I'm not convinced this is going over the line. I'm just not at this stage, because I can see too many problems and I see too many complaints coming in, and we're opening debates on every front at the moment, and that is a problem. We should have stuck with the first, dealt with the Metro North, then taken line by line over a period. Take one line, look at it, and do your debates on that, and then move to the next. But to take all this in one go, the way we're doing this, to me, is a very problematic way of doing things. Okay.
Thank you. Deputy Coppinger is a member of the committee, so there's one other member after you, then that's Deputy Lahart.
Okay,
so
sorry, I was in the...
No, just trying to... Committee action members have the right to speak for...
If somebody's indicated, that's fine.
I'm happy to... Deputy Lahart is here ahead of you, but you have the right to speak first.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
That's fair enough. Okay.
Thanks, Deputy. Appreciate it.
I'm trying to be fair to everybody.
Look, I will be very brief. I appreciate Deputy Coppinger allowing me to speak. Many of the points I've made to the NTA when we met them as a grouping, but I do want to put them on the public record. Just in relation to the, I mean, I disagree with Deputy Ellis. You've contracted out 10%, and because you were saying it's going to increase, but it looks like it's at 10%, and but it looks that it's 10%.
I think if members would address remarks through me.
Sorry, through the chair. The other thing is in relation to go ahead. Look, the NTA know, and all my colleagues know, my party are huge champions of Dublin Bus. But we do have some, as public representatives, sometimes are afraid to call out Dublin Bus's failings. And the go ahead, you know, they're workers too. It's in an early phase. I have 2 routes in my own area. I think, maybe after 6 months, if those issues are still issues, we raise them then. One of my problems with this is the Minister's lack of kind of input. He kind of stands by, doesn't have any kind of direct input or ideas, particularly in terms of the gap that's going to exist between 2018 and 2027. There is a big gap. Bus Connects, the corridors won't be completed until 2027, which is the same time as when the metro will be finished. So it's intervention measures too that I'd like to see between now and then, and I'd like to ask your view on that. I have said to the NTA privately, and I say publicly, all these corridors have to be done. I will echo what Senator Humphreys has said. Can you reassure us, or can you advise us in relation to your human resource capacity? Like that you actually have all the staff you need, because if you don't, that's a matter for the Oireachtas. If you have all the staff you need in terms of engineers, in terms of administrators, designers, all the rest of it, actually push all of this through. Because if you don't, we certainly urgently need to look at assisting you there, because you're taking on a lot. The one point I said in relation to Bus Connects, it absolutely has to happen phase 2. We had disagreements on phase 1, but you're to come back with a second iteration on that, and we look forward to that in the spring. I have said to a number of colleagues, if the bus corridors were sold on the basis, if these were Lewis trams we were putting in along those 16 spines, I think there'd be a much bigger public buy-in into them. So my point to you has been, and people would be willing to wear and accept the being discommoded in the significant way they're going to be discommoded. So we need to sell it as essentially Lewis on rubber wheels, and it has to be of the highest standard, which I know you're looking at from a design phase. I have strongly proposed the idea of what you call articulated buses and Dubs call the bendy buses, because in terms of access points, they allow multiple access points. I know one of your resistances about that is that because they involve a lot of standing room. But if you, and we'll say how far out in the city you allow someone stand for a full journey, but right at the moment, if you're coming from Sandyford on the Lewis, you are standing from start to finish in some cases. So I think that's a decision a commuter must take. But in terms of the attractiveness, if people see these are long length buses, they look like a tram, they have all the tech that a tram has on it, they stop at bus stops that have all the technology, show where people need to connect, etc. So I really would push you to look at that. And they did, having introduced those articulated buses in Belfast only recently, and they would face some of the challenges that we have. But in terms of marketing this, I think it would be a significant selling point, that people aren't getting a second-class system, but they're getting a really first-class bus system. The couple of things that I want just to ask you about in the interim period. Our bus corridors aren't policed. If they were really policed, it would encourage a lot of people to switch from cars to buses, and it would grow confidence in bus corridors and the policing of boxes. Now, that doesn't have to be done by the Garda Síochána. That is under different jurisdiction in other countries. Can you look at that? And this is where the Minister lets us down. You know, I don't think he loses sleep at night worrying over the traffic congestion in Dublin. And there are some public representatives that do spend a lot of time thinking about how can we do this and how can we do that. And in fairness, you listen. But what do we do between now and when the first corridor is delivered? Because the congestion is absolutely growing. I saw Antashka suggest this morning, they were saying that you didn't look at the idea of a corridor on the M50, going from interchange to interchange as part of it. And the one final question, and thanks Chair, is this, and it's a serious question. There will be two areas in my own constituency. You've introduced a service, the 175, that essentially connects the green Lewis with the red Lewis. My ultimate ambition would be to see a tram line do that. However, there is sufficient road width and possibilities for very clever landscaping along almost the entire section of roads that lead from the red Lewis to the green Lewis in Dundrum, where you could have a dedicated, segregated bus corridor. So my question is this. Is the core corridor design piece, is that the only show in town for the next decade? Or is there a possibility, you know, to add? Or can local authorities do it if they feel there's a demand? Must it be NTA led, and will there be funding in in the interim years for other possible corridor projects that come up and are actually really feasible in the interim period?
The final question now is Deputy Ruth Coppinger.
Thanks, Gerlach. Yeah, sorry I missed the presentation, but I have the notes. I know specifically that you're talking about the bus corridors, and that is important, but I think it's inevitable that everybody is raising about bus connects in general and some of the issues pertaining to the NTA at the moment. And I just wanted to pick up on the point about privatisation, because I questioned the Minister this morning on that. Yes, it is true that there's much more pending, because Bus Éireann has been told its services now on 3 more routes are going to be put out to tender. And we know the reality is that in the last round, even though Bus Éireann underbid Go Ahead by 3 million, it didn't get the contract. And it seems to be a rigged system in favour of private companies. I just wanted to ask about Go Ahead. I've lots of reports from bus workers that it's impossible for those workers to stay working in that company for a very long time, because the starting salary and the top rates of pay are between 10 and 14,000 less than Bus Éireann workers.
And to the committee and to the witnesses, you know, I think that's the affairs of pay in a company are not fairly a matter for us to comment on here.
Well, it's connected with the National Transport Authority.
We're talking about, and I appreciate your concern, I think there are other fora for that, and I would have to rule that question out.
Well, at the transport meeting here last week, 3 million was assigned from the estimates to the NTA for the Go Ahead. Chair, you're being very partisan. This came up last week at the meeting here, where 3 million was assigned to the National Transport Authority in relation to Go Ahead.
As fair as I can to you.
Very fair, Chair.
And to every other member. Can I say, Deputy, I take my role seriously. Before I started the meeting, I went through how we'd hope to deal with everybody, to get everybody in, to allow them to ask pertinent and relevant questions. And a question to a witness about the pay rates of any company is not relevant to bus.
It's not relevant to the National Transport Authority.
Not at this meeting.
Okay, that's very interesting. I would have thought it was actually to the Transport Committee, but I'll move on.
Fair. I mean, you can't just throw in a random rattle bag of questions to the good people who've come here.
I think I know a little bit more about it than yourself now, James.
You know more about everything, of course.
The point is, right, that the National Transport Authority has been given, you know, to do with privatising. The belief of the unions in Bus Éireann was that there was going to be a period of time to see how this company was performing, so it is related, right? And I would hope that we care about bus workers' conditions. I'm sure you're not suggesting we don't. But also, in relation to Bus Connects, the suspicion of a lot of people who've attended public meetings on this issue. And I met Mr. Cregan down in Blanchardstown, and I know you had a lot of people coming up to you, and you probably had your ears kind of burnt off you with people saying, repeating the same things, which was mainly to do with loss of local routes, including, it seems to be the pattern in all of the areas, this idea of just creating this big giant corridor and this super route. But the problem is, you know, you're just increasing the amount of routes that are feeding into it, and therefore people feel when they arrive at this hub, in our case Blanchardstown town centre, which is one of the busiest shopping areas in the whole of the country, you're going to be competing with people in neighbouring districts for the same buses. And that's why it's proven to be unpopular. It's nothing to do with people not appreciating public transport. And in particular, Little Pace, I know the 70, but also even in my own area, the 38s, the idea that you have to get onto 2 buses when you only had to get on 1 before. So I think what this boils down to is we need investment to increase public transport, not just rejig what we currently have. And in the case of the question that was raised about Metro North and this, really, people's gardens, etc., which are going to be cut across in this project, which we all want to see bus lanes, but we actually have a massive shortage of light rail. And the likes of Blanchardstown, obviously, I know there's a plan for Finglas, but you're talking about a huge conurbation with 100,000 people just reliant on buses alone. It can't work, not when you're 10 kilometres outside of the city. It's just too far, and there's too many obstacles in the way in terms of traffic lights and so on. And we have people really suffering 1 hour and 20 minutes trying to get home from work. Their whole quality of life is affected. So I don't have a problem with Bus Connects if it was implemented on top of what we already have, but not to take away, routes and rejig them in this way. And I know there's public consultation going on in relation to these bus corridors, and I'm sure people have been informed by yourself, but I suppose the question is, it's a CPO process, so what happens if people refuse to cede their territory, if you like, or their space that they feel is important? And how will noise or buses being brought nearer to their homes, is there going to be insulation? Is there going to be noise abatement? Because I'm assuming that will be an issue with people as well. It's not that you mind just ceding your flowers and your bedding or whatever, but it's also about noise being brought closer to you, which can really affect people's quality of life.
Thank you. Right, so we've all the questions now. We're in your hands. You have all the answers. So if it's reasonable, of the people who are here, if you answer their questions first, I know, if that's fair. Because
I may have to leave to speak on something. I don't mean to be ignorant. Okay.
Your absence will be noted. I want to joke when I said that.
Okay, we'll try and answer all the questions that we were asked,
you want,
if that's
I'm
okay.
just conscious that people are
because there's some overlap, so some questions might respond to a number of people, if that's okay.
Chair, I think, which, in fairness, the deputy has to leave. I think the compulsory purchases might be the first one to address.
Yeah.
And then
Okay, I might ask you to deal with that one, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, the Bus Connects core bus corridor project is going to require compulsory purchase. Really, when you're beyond 1 or 2 or 3 people, you can't do land acquisition by agreement. You have to use a compulsory purchase order process. Our intention is simply to deal with people fairly and properly during that procedure. And we started to meet people. The first 4 corridors, we had 343 people potentially affected. We wrote out to every one of them in advance and invited them to contact us for a one-to-one meeting. We've had about 40 meetings so far with people, and we're waiting for the remainder to contact us, and we'll meet with them. In regard to things like noise abatement, that's something we get into at the next stage of design. We're really at the first step of concept design, and later on we have to do what used to be called an EIS, an Environmental Impact Statement. It's now called an Environmental Impact Assessment Report. And in that, we're going to have to assess the noise impacts and the air quality impacts on all property. And if there's mitigation measures of whatever type it is needed, we will simply do them. But we're far too early at this stage to be able to say exactly where we are affecting, where we're affecting people at the point that we need to do those measures. Just on your point about the local routes out in Blanchardstown, it was the team that came up generally there. We did get a lot of feedback from the consultation on the bus services, and it is taking us a lot of time to go through those. 30,000 submissions is not a small bag to go through, and we will be working our way. We are working our way through it. We will be redesigning the network to try and address most of those issues. We won't be able to address them all, but we're absolutely confident we can address a whole lot of them and still keep a better bus system. That was our only objective in doing it, is to try and get a better bus system overall for people. And it will be a number of months before we're finished that process and before we have something to go back out to consultation with and get people's feedback. But at that stage, repeating again, we will not have solved everybody's problem, but we'd be disappointed if we hadn't have solved a lot of them.
And I might just deal with the issue of privatisation, because again, and I've said this many times in this chamber, we don't consider the tendering of the bus services as being privatisation of the services, because the routes remain managed by a state agency, ourselves, what it is tendering of a service. And the state operators, Dublin Bus and Bus Éireann, are entitled to bid for those individual tenders. So the routes are controlled by ourselves, the fares are managed by ourselves, so there's no change other than the operator may change when we tender the services. So I just don't want to... Well, I'm just saying that the term privatisation is not appropriate to when you are tendering a public service. It's
if
not
you're
comparable.
taking in a private...
So, and I just want to make the comparison.
I'm sorry.
No,
I just want to make the comparison.
Excuse me, please, to everybody.
Somebody comes into the committee and says something that's completely false. If a private company is going to run the routes, it's a private company.
So I want to try and get this meeting to have it continue in the calm, reasoned way we always have them. And I think that the witness is just giving her views in terms of her. Sorry, you can have your view, no problem. In fact, we're taking, at request of Deputy Senator Humphreys, we're dealing with your questions first, even though you were last into the room. So be fair, please. Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm just making the comparison that we have a service that's operated the Lewis services, and again, that's not considered a privatised service. It's considered a service that's operated by a private operator, a private company. And I just want to make that distinction because we have made that distinction many times. We don't consider that the tendering of public services equates to privatisation of those services.
Okay, well, Chair, can I take that up?
Well, you can. Well,
just in two sentences. Yeah. The money that accrues, like the bus fares, etc., when it's a Bus Éireann, go back into the state coffers. Any profit or, surplus. The money that accrues to the private company running the new routes accrues to the shareholders. Okay, so that is the difference. And it's a huge difference. And the workers' paying conditions are the other difference. So please don't insult us by suggesting there's no...
Move on.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. I just wanted to correct it.
Yeah.
So we might go back to Deputy Rock's questions. And this, again, comes across, a number of deputies have asked this, is why the staggered consultation. So the reason why is that it's quite a significant consultation that we're undertaking on all 16 corridors, and we want to be in a position as an organisation to be able to respond and to be available for the individual property owners. And that's the reason why we staggered it, so that we start with 4 corridors. So if we're talking about the potential numbers, which could be up to 1,500 is it, property owners that could be impacted, we want to be in a position that we can organise the one-to-one meetings as we've indicated. So that's the reason for the staggered consultation. The question then was raised by a number of deputies about why the network, why wait or why do the corridor consultation without having completed the network consultation. And I suppose we have said this also, that the corridors that are being proposed are needed, and the improvements in those corridors are needed no matter what network is being operated. Because these are the 16 main corridors.
Government corridors where there may not be buses running on them. I mean, surely the network has to be agreed first before you then start.
We're talking about corridors where there are already bus services. So
and other ones.
Sorry?
And other ones.
We're talking about the main corridors, which already have a substantial number of buses.
I think this, can I ask, I want to try and keep this on the even keel, and I think everybody's entitled to the point of view. What I'd like, if Ms. Graham would respond, and then if there were questions after she's finished, then...
I think in fairness, it was a deputy short one myself, and as a prime example, is you can understand a corridor in relation to Marion Road, because there's a huge number of buses going there. But when you move to Nutley,
we're just, and this committee, we're responding to those that are out for public consultation at the moment, which is the first 4 corridors, which were all in the north side. So that's what we're.
I gave the example of Gardner Street.
Well, there is currently services.
I want to try and keep this on even keel again, and I'm anxious that you would listen to, you ask questions, you weren't interrupted. And I think, I think you're entitled to your reply.
So Hugh might just deal with the Gardner Street question.
Yeah. Gardner Street, it was the route for the A-spine in the network design over the summer. But Currently, there are a lot of bus services running down Gardner Street, including Bus Air and bus services. So in the revised network design, we will be looking at whether the A-spine should be down on Connaught Street and some of the other bus services down Gardner Street, or should it stay the same? We don't know the answer yet. Either way, what we are certain about is both O'Connell Street and Gardner Street will both be busy with buses. And while Connaught Street has a large amount of effectively bus priority by exclusion of cars, Gardner Street doesn't. So we need to improve Gardner Street, even with the current system today and with whatever system we have in the future. We need to put bus priority in Gardner Street. So that's why we put it forward, and it does not presuppose which route the current bus service was run down. It doesn't presuppose that.
Okay, so Deputy Rock, there were your questions that were being responded to there. So just stick to members of the committee then. Sorry, a few more. Oh, sorry, yeah. Sorry.
Sorry, just...
In terms of splitting the consultation, yeah, I've had that request as well from others. We'll certainly consider that there is a logic to that. There's also a logic to keeping it together and managing it as a single corridor. So if you give us the opportunity to consider it, and certainly resources, being quite honest, resources and managing it is an issue. Because if we only had one corridor to do, very simple, but we've 16 corridors around the city, that's a lot of corridors. And starting to split them up in twos, and then we get a request to split in threes, you suddenly see that you know, it becomes a very meeting
from my perspective, and I'm certainly not jumping down your throat here, it would seem that the Swords to City Centre one has a very natural delineation, which would be the M50, for instance. Senator Humphreys made a very sensible suggestion, I thought, where you had effectively two committees outside M50, inside M50, we'll say for the sake of this, and then they came together in one longer committee to consider the macro issues. That would obviously require more resources, but would seem like a useful thing. And as Senator Humphreys said, I think it was Senator Humphreys, if it's a question of resources, that's a matter for the Oireachtas. If you want to request more by way of resource, I mean, that's an open door. We want to do this right. We don't want to do it on the cheap.
Well, let us take it away and just consider that suggestion and see how we can do it. We do want to meet the need out there. If that requires us to split, then we're certainly not going to deny that. I think you asked as well about any plans for a second meeting. Yes, is the short answer. This is not intended to be just a one-off meeting. We didn't set dates for the second meeting because the idea was at the first meeting there'd be a discussion as to how frequent should we meet and when should the next meeting be. Terms of reference came up with a couple of people. The terms of reference, they are very short for this. They're half a page of bullet points. And in essence, and we're happy to circulate it through the committee if that's what you wish, but just to say the essence of it is to facilitate a two-way dialogue process. That's the essence of it. And allows us to provide information more directly to people who are directly affected by the proposals. It allows us to answer queries that people have, and then more importantly, or just as importantly, it allows people to give feedback and give us suggestions. And I'm not blindly saying we're going to follow all the suggestions we get, but I think as yourself, Deputy Shortall, said, was our proposal cast in stone, and are we not for changing? The answer is they're not cast in stone, and if there's good ideas and ways to do it better, we're in the market to do it, because it's a very difficult set of proposals in various places, and if people have better ideas to make it better again, we'll change.
The question of independent chairs, was that raised by...
It is our intention. I should say we had our first consultative community forum yesterday evening on the Clongriffin to City Centre scheme. We have an independent chair for that. We intend to put an independent chair on all of at all of the meetings. We think it works better from view of the people involved. So there will be an independent chair at each one.
Okay.
Just continue on then. Just continue with Deputy Shortall's questions and then maybe get back to Deputy Munster's. So, suggesting that there was more winners than losers in terms of traffic congestion. Again, you know, what we're putting forward really is, and we're discussing the bus corridors here, which is about trying to provide more space for the public transport and improve the services that are currently operating. Because while the existing services that are provided primarily by Bus Air and along that corridor, their operating times are getting challenged as the road gets more and more congested. So this is a plan for ensuring that we have a better reliability of journey times on those corridors and to avoid the increasing congestion and increasing journey times, because they are just going to get longer and longer if we don't put in place this bus priority.
You mean primarily Dublin Bus?
Sorry, Dublin Bus, apologies. Yeah, I mean Dublin Bus because we're talking about Dublin. Yeah, so it's really, currently Dublin Bus provide a very good service around the city, but they are getting delayed. Their journey times are getting longer and longer as the congestion increases.
But why not deal with the congestion issue? I mean, the routes are very good as they are. And why are you proposing to change the routes so drastically? If you stick with the routes and you improve on the congestion and you know, the blockages along the way.
That's what I'm suggesting. I'm sorry, I'm not answering in relation to the route. What I'm saying is that in relation to the bus corridors, this is our proposal for dealing with congestion on those corridors. And as I said earlier, they are needed no matter what network of services is being operated, because these main corridors into the city, these radial corridors into the city, are the ones that are going to be used no matter what network of services we put in place. So that's our response, our initial response, our draft response, which is out for consultation, about how to manage the growing congestion for our bus services. So, and I think the Dublin Cycling Campaign, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, we're aware of lots of commentary about some of the details that we put forward in the proposals. And the key point I would make on that is all that we've put out there are concept designs at this stage. They are concept designs. It's the first step in a long process before you end up with a finally designed route where everything is honed to its nth degree. So at in terms of the standards we're using, we're the people who produce the National Cycle Manual, which I think the cycling groups would recognise is a very solid, well thought through standard. So we'll be applying that in the detailed design we do in all these corridors, and as we evolve through the design process, most of the issues that people are identifying now, we'll see them being resolved. But when we're trying to do 200 kilometres of design, 230 kilometres of design, which we are at the moment, it is concept level only, and the final engineering details in its fine-tuned form, we'll get them right at the next stage. And I know in particular there was 2 items mentioned, I think it was by Deputy Ryan there, which was details at junctions and details around bus stops. And both of those fall into that category. Certainly the first one, junctions, it's really at the next stage. We've honed those to get them as good as they can be. Details at bus stops, that's more difficult. You have two solutions there, and sometimes we don't have the space to do the perfect solution, which is bring the cycle route around the back of the bus stop, which I know most people would favour. If we have the space, we try and do it. If we don't have the space, we haven't. Again, it's an area we'll fine-tune at the next stage of the process.
I can just check just on that briefly if I can. And this isn't easy, but we've got to do it quickly. But the fear from the cycling community is that the concept seems to be, when we come to get difficult pitch points, the first response, the concept, is to get the cyclists out of the road. And I'll cite the one, and this is only just done, it was released yesterday on one of the cycling websites, the initial drafts for Rathmines Road, just to take that as an example. Rathmines, I think the AM peak cycling numbers is 1,650 or so. It's about 1,300 cars and vans. So actually cycling is the main, buses and probably maybe have large numbers, but certainly compared to cars, cycling is the much bigger mode. Yet the first response in terms of getting this 4-lane solution in everywhere is to, as I said, narrow the footpaths in Rathmines and remove the cyclists, and remove them in a way that's just unworkable. And would see so the concern is that the first concept design seems to be to think cyclists out, and that's the worry.
Can I respond? Yeah.
We haven't published anything for the Rathfarnham to city centre corridor yet, so we're not commenting on anything that people might have seen anywhere at this stage. But if you take the previous example you have mentioned, which was Fairview, you can take it, we looked at loads of options to try and put in a continuous cycle route down Malahide Road all the way to join Fairview. And we believe that there are disadvantages to all the other ones, and the one that we put forward, which is to reroute that section through the quiet roads of Marino, have a toucan crossing on Fairview to connect back onto cycle route, is a reasonable solution. One of the solutions we looked at, which was to widen further the road out which would have meant we would have had to go further into people's properties on one side of the road, to the point we would have removed the opportunity for parking in the driveways, which they all currently do. And we've tried to, when we're widening these roads, we've tried to preserve as far as we can the opportunity to park a car in the driveway if that's what people were doing beforehand. But this is a consultation. If people think we've got it wrong and think we should go to another solution, then by all means they need to propose it. They need to tell us that, but they need to propose what the solution is. What is the alternative they'd like us to do there? And perhaps we should, we will look at it, and perhaps we should go that direction. But we didn't take these decisions lightly. You can take it, there's a lot of work gone into each of these decisions before we came up with what we put out there.
Sorry, yeah.
Just in relation to the cycling complaint, apart from kind of individual kind of details in different areas, I mean, the charge is being made by the cycling community that you're not adhering to basic design standards, including not adhering to the manual. And surely that's something that should be addressed from the very start, separately with with representatives of the cycling community, rather than them having to go along to each of the consultative forums and be making the case there. This is an overarching issue in relation to the design standard. And can that be resolved between yourselves and the cycling community?
Sorry. The short answer is that it's the same thing again. We have only put out concept designs. People are interrogating them as if they're detailed designs. As regards the engagement with one of the cycling groups, I think as recent as today we responded to them saying that at the end of the consultation period, we're happy to start meeting with you then, because now we're going into the design phase. So in the meantime, put in your submission identifying what the issues are. At the end of the consultation process, we've committed to start an engagement then. And if there's details that we need to change, we'll take them aboard at that stage. So we have communicated that, I think, as recent as today.
Okay, so may I ask, if there's no other issues, if you can respond to the individual deputies who aren't here, if you wish. If not, sorry, Deputy Ellis.
Deputy
yes.
Senator Humphreys.
Senator, I'm not forgetting it.
Do you want to try?
I am.
Yeah.
I think you start off, Senator Humphreys, with the very fair point that corridors should only be where the bus services are. And we agree with that. I think in all the 4 corridors we published, those corridors require upgrading no matter what bus network is put in place. They're all the vital routes on the north side that need to be done. When we publish south side, we can discuss Nutley Lane at that stage. We haven't published it yet. On the community forums and independent chair, I think we've answered that. Sustainable urban SUDs, we will be taking that into account, of course, during the design stage. Back repeating my phrase again, we're at concept only. We haven't gone into it currently. We know that people have been affected by our publication of plans. We know that. But the reality is we can only publish these as we get them to a certain stage. And really all 16 corridors will be published by mid-February, which is only, less than 2 months away from now. So at that stage, the details will be out there, and at least people can take their views. Are they affected or not affected at that stage?
I'll answer the question in relation to resources within the NTA. So we have requested additional resources. Obviously, given the level of work, we're confident that those resources will be approved and will be put in place, and that we'll be in a position to manage all the significant projects that are going out for consultation and are currently under consultation.
Okay,
no,
sorry.
There's still one or two questions.
Yeah, sorry,
to answer,
just
so
before we do,
finish.
I just want to make it clear. I just want to get myself in correct order here. I'm dealing with people who've asked questions already, and anybody who wasn't here will answer their questions to them. So I just want to get that. I'm conscious Deputy Ellis wants to get in there as well.
Just waiting for
yeah, of course. Finish off your good questions there, Sam.
Yeah. I think we had a couple more.
You hadn't did.
Congestion charging was one you asked about. Congestion charging isn't part of the transport strategy that we published 2 years ago and was approved 2 years ago. But we effectively achieved the same outcome of congestion charging by various restrictions that have occurred in the city centre. So as we dedicate more space to the bus lanes in the city centre, it has the same net effect as if you applied a congestion charge. There's less space available to the cars, and therefore there's less cars going into city centre. So that's all I think I can say on that at the moment. Pigeon House Road, I think you mentioned the fact that it's an indicative line only, and that is correct. So that corridor will be published in mid-February, and the full details for that Ringsend corridor will be available at that stage. I think we've picked all yours now.
I'll take it, Deputy.
Can I just, and I think because I asked in a roundabout, but other deputies about, the deputies also asked the question. Could I just confirm on the CPO compulsory purchase that we all have the same understanding as what yourselves have? And my understanding is you have to send, the letters have gone out on the north side. You've offered the meetings. You'll cover the people's costs in relation to whatever experts their legal advice that they will need under the CPO structure. The other is you're entitled, once the letters have gone out, to survey the property and surveyors to enter the properties to ensure that you can do the design and that you can actually carry out the work prior to an agreement being made on the financial settlement that would be agreed. Now, are we all under the same understanding in relation to the CPO process, or have I got your thinking wrong in any manner there? Because I think we need absolute clarity, because this is the level of detail question every member here
will have to include all aspects of that, because otherwise it wouldn't be a fair process.
Well, it's about a 9 out of 10 you get.
9 out of 10.
9 out of 10.
That's almost a quota. The quota is 10 out of 10.
The 10 that's missing, I tell you, don't point out of it.
The letters we have issued are only information letters. That's all they are. So there's no CPO process activated yet.
Has the letter sealed the valuation at the moment that you've issued?
No.
So the letter, that's not a letter of intent then?
Correct.
No. Okay.
Absolutely correct. So at a later stage, the steps that you have said would get triggered, and
So it's the next letter that seals.
I don't want to say
then I'm 10 out of 10 at the next letter.
Yeah, 10 out of 10 at some point. It may not be.
You get 20 out of 20. That has a ring about it here. Sorry, Deputy Ellis, you want to get
answers to mine, and then I'll ask a question or two.
I'm conscious that Deputy Work wants to come back in, and we have a new
I'll
visitor at the moment. Sorry, yeah, just
I'll come back in
first. Sorry, that he.
So Deputy Ellis just also kind of requested that there should be feedback on the submissions related to the network, and I think we cover that to say, look, again, the corridors that we have out for consultation are required no matter what network of services is put in place, because they are the main busy corridors, radial corridors into the city centre. And I think we covered the CPO powers, and the other thing I think you said was the whole thing's a mess, confused, like would you start one project and then continue on with the others? Well, I just think that we are bringing, and we make no apology for bringing these projects forward all together because the city needs them, because congestion is growing, and we think that we need to move on all aspects of our public transport system, both metro, bus and rail, and there is an urgency about delivering these projects for the city. So that's why, while I know it's difficult for communities to see that there's a lot of consultation going on at the same time, or even on a staggered basis, we do need to bring these projects forward and start delivering them, because there's a timeline about in terms of planning and even construction before we would actually see these improvements. So we're ambitious to get these projects moving and get them to a point of an agreed kind of planning permission and then move into construction. So that's what we're proposing to do. Just in relation to the go-ahead services that have commenced operation, there have been a few teething issues. I think we agree that there have been some teething issues that have resulted in some complaints But we believe that they will kind of work themselves out. There's issues related to when you're changing both an operator but also services at timetables, and we believe that these are beginning to calm down now, and that the services are operating well. One of the other things that actually has impacted particularly on the 17A is congestion, so the commencement of that service at a time where you've got a very big build-up of congestion, particularly in the lead-up to Christmas, has caused difficulties for running times. But we will make any amendments that need to be made in order to improve the reliability with go-ahead. But we think that the services will certainly bed down, and we need to give them at least a number of weeks and months operation before you can make judgment on those services.
In regards to the Metro North, which to me, I went to that many consultations on it, and we were told that that would take something like 70,000 cars off the road on a weekly basis, and I'm sure would be well up even further than that. The impact of that, why we have not completed that process and then jumped onto this, and I know we have to improve standards and we have to do things, but this isn't the programme for government to do the Metro North. Why haven't we just concentrated on our efforts to get this over the line, then look at the routes or the corridors as we're talking about? But I do agree with Roisin in a lot of ways. The routes in general have worked very well. The areas of congestion is the problem, where we're going to run into problems. The likes of the Harts Corners, these places where you have to go in after land, you have to go in after them. That's where, in my opinion, the concentration should have been, to get solutions there. And then you could start looking even more into the corridors and improving them. But I just think the ordinary routes should have been concentrated on more, and many of them should be left alone, because these were hard fought for by communities, and now there's uproar over them. And I could go through the list in my own area, which I've already said it to you. So the answer, just tell me what's happening with Metro North, why we haven't pushed on that even more.
It's a different type of...
No, it's not. It's not 10 years.
No,
it is 10 years away.
I think the point is that you have different people who have to use different means to get into work. And the Metro North, while it suit a huge number of people, it won't suit everybody, isn't that it? And
no, yeah, but it takes across the whole city. It takes like some 70,000 cars off the road a week. Do you understand? So we're pumping money into this Bus Connects, and that's the worry I have.
Okay.
But the thing is that
just before you come in there, I want to try and finish by 3:30. So I appreciate and I welcome your contribution.
Can we just have an answer on just the Metro?
Do you want to get an answer?
It's very short.
Everybody else has been here for 2 hours.
Then you can speak.
I'm just anxious that. Sorry, yeah.
So the Metrolink is obviously a project that's running in parallel. So both, and that has been done in conjunction with TII. So the consultation, we carried out a consultation on the emerging preferred route, and we expect to go out and complete that in January of next year and go out on a preferred route for consultation again at the end of January, early February. Okay?
Okay, so Deputy Chambers, yeah.
Chair, and I'd like to welcome Hugh and Anne, and I'm sorry I'm late, I didn't get all the other exchanges. I just want to go back to Bus Connects and the issues that we're having. I know, Hugh, I engaged with you about, say, the Blanchetown Shopping Centre and the proposal to have it as the transport hub, and certainly in Dublin 15, if you were to go out there at the moment with the Christmas shopping season, you'll see the gridlock that you're planning a potential transport hub. And I know you mentioned the upgrade of the exchange. So my fear is that obviously some of the infrastructural proposals around bus lanes are welcome in terms of addressing congestion issues and connectivity of our bus network. But you're parking the route issue whilst it's going ahead with the others, but in many ways they're intertwined, and my fear is that I suppose my question is just, are you planning alternative, bus lanes aside from the ones you've mentioned? Because obviously if you're planning a spinal bus network, which is what you've outlined in your plan, with very little mention of other bus lane development in your projections. Can you outline what your plans are for alternative bus lanes? So take, in village areas that are outside the spinal routes, what's your capital plans for those? Because obviously if you're going to amend your route system that you've committed to, then you'll have to have capital expenditure to address congestion issues where there are existing radial routes that connect to town. So I'm wondering, will there be a future phase of this kind of route system that I know there will be of the route system, but of the bus corridors that is in addition to what you've announced now, because I fear that this is obviously development. This is linked into your spinal proposals from the route system, and if you're not providing for any additional bus lanes, then it undermines potentially the route system. I just want to ask as well about obviously the changes to the routes, as Deputy Ellis mentioned, has caused significant concern across communities. And one of your designers, Jarrett Walker, said that minor changes to the route system will collapse his plan as he's designed it. So have you sidelined him in terms of the route system? Who is redesigning the route?
Deputy, I think it's not reasonable for you to name people here.
I think it's totally reasonable to name the people, the designer, as part of the project. I'm asking a question about, they can clarify.
Hold on a second, I'm the chairman, if you don't mind. Yeah. I'm sorry if you don't like this, but committees, when we begin them, I always read this out, and what I read out was that you cannot criticise anybody who's not actually by name.
So I'm going to name the company, Jarrett Walker Company.
So no, just let's get it right.
I can name.
Can I please ask you just to not mention anybody by name? If that's reasonable, I think it is.
So I'm not going to mention anybody's name. So right. Jarrett Walker Company and Associates, I think, is the name of the company.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
which is the company. How are you?
Without name.
The company.
Sorry.
I can name a company.
Okay, tell you what, come here. I want you to make your contribution. I don't know the company you're naming, right? But I know they're not here to defend themselves. If you're saying that a person, or I thought it was a person.
I've not made any accusation.
Except it's a company.
I've quoted what the person has said.
I'm sorry about this, and I'm really sorry. It's the first time I've ever had a debate with you at a committee, and I'm trying to help you by just making sure that you stay within the rules and ask your question like everybody else did.
I appreciate that, and I'm sure Hugh and Anne can appreciate that those can clarify those remarks that were made around minor changes to the route system will result in the plan that was originally designed collapsing. And how do you square those remarks with what you've agreed to do? Because the public have concerns that whilst this project continues to plough on, that the route issues they have won't be addressed. I'd just like you to answer questions around that. Also, around obviously people just broadening it out a little in terms of there's significant issues with parking around the suburbs in Dublin that relates to bus connects and it relates to train stations as well. It also relates to Lewis stations. And I'm asking, what plans have you got to actually increase parking capacity in the peripheral areas where you want people to use this route network that bus connects? And are you addressing the difficulties with the companies you have jurisdiction over, namely Irish Rail, around the increases in fees? So we're trying to encourage people to use public transport. Next door we have the Climate Change Committee that's blue in the face, trying to encourage people to use public transport, but people are being ripped off so we ripped off by Irish Rail and other entities who are increasing their parking fees and discouraging the use of public transport. And I think the NTA needs to come on board around trying to encourage people to use the capacity that you have, and it's presently discouraging it. I also want to ask about the growth projections. So in the Bus Connect plan, I can only speak for West Dublin. And even in the bus lane system you've proposed, a lot of what Bus Connect contains doesn't future-proof the bus network. So in a lot of areas that are going to have, say, huge population growth in, say, the next 5 to 10 years, what planning is being done to ensure that the bus network can be amended, and also that the infrastructure will be put in place so that we take into account the national planning framework and future population changes, because that was a serious cause of concern where there was actually a decrease of transport connectivity in some areas where there's going to be huge population growth in the next 3 to 5, sorry?
Sorry, I just took that.
Is there something?
No, just wondering about the next round. We're number of us waiting for the next round.
Yeah,
questions.
well, I'm happy to have those.
Can I just say that they're very important questions, and one which I know you will know that I've asked a number of times, just in relation to the point you make about people or even coming from out of the city altogether to connect in, and we're talking about on the M1, there's a huge number of cars which could benefit from a park and ride, and I know while it's not part of this physical bus connect, it is to be linked in by new bus services, if that's a fair question.
You want to respond to it?
Okay. I tell you, it's only get a chance to use questions.
There's just one question in this round, yeah?
Come here. We're here all night if you want. I don't have a problem, but I want to get my question answered now.
No, you take everybody in a round, and then the next round you take one question.
No.
Just seems an odd way to do it.
No, I was trying to get. I'm sorry if you didn't understand me. This new deputy, I don't mean a new deputy came into the room and is anxious that he would be included in the debate. Okay, so that's why his question was asked, and I'm happy to do that, and I know you're happy as well. So
I'm saying is the logical thing would be to take another round of questions.
When you're sitting here, you can do that. I'm here now today. That's why I'm doing it.
If I answer the park,
would be handy.
There's no need to have a spat now. Please, this deputy asked some questions. I think they're good ones.
if I answer your question, which was crossover on the parking side of things, Bus Connects does include the objective of putting in park and ride sites at various locations around the perimeter of the city. We haven't done a lot of work on them because until you put in the bus lanes to ensure that people can travel quickly from that parking site, it isn't going to work, is the reality. So it is something we will be bolting onto it in the not too distant future, because once we've done the investment in the bus lanes, we do want to maximise what they can achieve. So it will happen. If I go back to your other points there, Blanchardstown Shopping Centre and the congestion issues there and how is the bus going to work, it was a team that came up again and again out there. We were fully aware of it. The proposals we published do have bus lanes, do have continuous bus lanes for the bus in and out of that hub. So while there will be congestion in Blanchardstown Town Centre, the bus system, and continue to be, the bus system will get in and out of it on a bus lane, because that should be free of traffic, and assuming it's enforced properly. So the plans for those bus lanes are in the current document published.
On that, Chair, on that, just say, like, at the moment the Gardaí in Blanchardstown have opened the bus lanes to all cars around in and around the shopping centre because of the congestion with the existing lane system that we have. So I'm just telling you, as a present example, that they've had to just open it up because they can't manage with their existing lane network. So I think it's important to look at that when you're designing it at the moment.
And have a conversation with a Gardaí about that before they do it, perhaps. On plans for other routes,
If you mind, just listen to the answers.
And plans for other bus lanes and future phases, yes, this isn't the end of, these aren't the only corridors that should have bus lanes on them. There needs to be more in Dublin. I think there was an earlier question, I think it's Deputy Hart, who asked about orbital bus corridors. Yes, we do want to do some of them. They're in our transport strategy, but we want to start somewhere. So we're starting with the radial routes into the city centre first, and then afterwards we can see what else can be added in. On the bus network redesign and the submissions and the level of change, I think the comment that was made at the time was that up to 15% was easy to accommodate. Above 15%, the concept of the system began to unravel. So our job is to work through the submissions that we've got and to identify the changes that address the issues raised. And we're not looking at a percentage number. We're just looking at how we address the issues raised, and whatever that number comes out at later on, so be it. On the growth projections, and you asked what planning has been done to allow for future growth, the Bus Connects is at the heart of that. We're trying to put in place the infrastructure and ultimately an improved set of services that hopefully people are agreed with and happy with, that then can be scaled up further as time goes on to cater for the additional growth areas, which I do know exist out in Dublin 15. On the car parking.
On the car parking, we are looking with Irish Rail in particular, where possible, to put in additional car parking along at particular train stations. There's obviously, capacity constraints on car parks on the rail and the Lewis lines. It's not easy to increase that capacity, particularly within the city, but anywhere where we can, working with both TII and Irish Rail, we will put in additional capacity. It is, fees in relation to parking, it is a requirement generally to have a fee, because if you don't have a fee, it tends to be used for other parking rather than being used for. Well, we can debate whether the fee is excessive or not, but generally it is a reasonable fee.
Because similar to the fare, it's a problem.
Well, it would be felt that depending on the length of time that you occupy the parking space, there is a fee that's required, and we think it's proportionate at this stage, but we'll obviously look at that again with our.
I'm just saying there's empty car parks because of the level of fees, which I know you said at a previous committee that wasn't directly your responsibility. I'm just saying I believe it should be. And
well, I've said we'd look at that with the individual
I think, it's
organisations.
Yeah.
Okay, just a question I raised about the actual M1 and the need for park and ride there.
Yes. As part of the Metrolink project, will be a very large park and ride site at the north end of the Metro scheme, up around, close to Lisson Hall, what we're calling Estuary Station. But in the intervening period, Fingal County Council, supported by ourselves, will be developing a bus-based park and ride site close to that general location. And the route, the exact bus service, the route it goes, all that remains to be decided. But the concept which they're developing is put a bus-based park and ride site there. We do have the Dublin Port Tunnel that we can route bus services through, so it's not like some of the other corridors which would have a slow journey into the city centre. I can't tell you yet how soon that will be up and running, but in fairness to the council, they are proceeding as vigorously as they can.
What cars are they talking about?
I was hoping you wouldn't ask me, because I don't know.
Well, my car will certainly fit. You don't have a figure yet.
We'll send you on
but
figure.
But it won't be insignificant.
It will not be insignificant, no.
Well, I would like to say that to me that's a huge, it's very important, good news for people who travel on the M1, because that will take hundreds of cars, obviously, hopefully thousands of cars off that route, because as you come through the city, they're very narrow corridors, and when you get to the likes of Gardiner Street, God knows how long you'll be waiting in some cases. And the other point I'd like to make is that the tunnel at the moment, in my view, it is very congested, obviously, as traffic, depending on the hour of the day. And the issues there are obviously when you get to the pay points, and I've raised this a number of times, when you go through, when you pass, if it is an automated point, or even indeed if there's somebody sitting there taking the money from you, it doesn't engage till you've passed them, and quite often people have to get out of their cars and to negotiate getting through, having a fully properly paid pass, and I think that's a problem, and it's also a problem at the East Link as well. Increasingly every day I see some guy there trying to help people to get through when the mechanisms are not functioning or working. I don't expect you to have the answer today, or could you get us is somebody looking at that?
That would be a matter for TII, but we certainly can refer that to TII.
Yeah, but it is an important issue. It does affect the throughput of vehicles. Okay, so we're here nearly 2 hours now, so I want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to ask their questions. Deputy Rock.
Thank you, Chair.
This is the new round. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So, in the previous round of questioning, I focused on the theoretical and on the consultation process, because I think that's important. That's an important thing to highlight. Obviously, today we had a previous discussion on the routes. You're now revising those routes. I expect we'll have a future discussion on the routes. I realise in my opening I said that I've talked to you too many times in the past year, but I'd look forward to inviting you for one more round of discussions when you publish those revisions. I want to focus in on what is the main contentious point of the 4 proposed bus corridor routes, which is, after all, what we're here to talk about today. And I know, Hugh, in our previous meeting, when you kindly met with the committee, with the chair and myself and a few others, you had flagged this. You immediately understood this was going to be the crucial crunch point of the bus corridor. And it's been discussed since the initial report was launched in June 2018. It's been focused on very much. And that's the issue of Santry Village and the issue of making it a one-way road for vehicular traffic and a two-way bus lane. This obviously poses grave concerns to the residents of Santry, to those employers in Santry, to Omni Park Shopping Centre in Santry, who would register some 6 million car movements, well, 5.8 million car movements, 2.9 million in, 2.9 million out per year. 1,850 jobs, give or take there.
They will have to go left when they exit, isn't it?
That's right. That's right, Chair. It would also lead to the potential for rat running into Lorcan Road, Shanrath, etc., etc. So this is of grave concern to a great many residents in the constituency. And I suppose my question to you in opening is, do you have a plan B? Is there the possibility, even though these are called CBCs, continuous bus corridors, is there the possibility of, if you like, pausing that continuous nature of it for the mere 200 to 300 metre stretch, which is all it needs? Have there been projections done if the continuous bus corridor was paused for those 200 or 300 metres? If not, can a traffic projection be done in that regard? I mean, we're talking about a 12-kilometre long bus corridor and this one small 200 to 300 metre stretch, which is causing basically the entirety of the anxiety with regard to the bus corridor itself. So I think we all, public representatives, residents, yourselves, everybody involved, need to think somewhat outside of the box on this one. I think we can resolve it, and I think we can get out of it. And I'm curious to hear if you have any proposals at this stage, if you've examined any in the past, or if you have any traffic projections, if you were to pause that bus corridor. Like I mentioned, 5.8 million car movements in Omni Park Shopping Centre would mean a loss of jobs, absolutely. I know they've compiled a submission to you, and I've met with engineers who've proposed a number of alternatives. It would also, though, mean additional car movements. A lot of local journeys would treble in length as a consequence of this one-way change. From Shanless, where I live, Shannon, etc., etc. A lot of these local journeys would treble in length. In terms of what you mentioned in your opening statement, Ms. Graham, with regard to reducing carbon emissions, this would obviously run counter to that entirely. It would undercut one of the key principles, in my view, of the Bus Connects campaign, if you like, which is to reduce carbon emissions and to make more people use public transport. But this inadvertently would increase carbon emissions along this particular bus corridor, and that doesn't seem to run, in line with the principles that you set down. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that. In effect, what I want to emphasise, though, is, as you rightly predicted, Hugh, the Santry Village issue is proving the key bone of contention with regard to the bus corridors. And I'm not in the business of being against things for the sake of it, but I am in the business of flagging concerns and saying that, look, I delivered my November submissions to your office already. These are the December submissions already, and it is, the 12th of December. A lot of people are very exercised about this, and rightly so. It'll affect their lives, it'll affect their commutes, it'll affect their houses, their house prices, and the journeys they've made for a great many years. So I'd hope you have a plan B in mind already, and I'd appreciate if you'd answer my questions with regard to traffic impacts if we were to suspend, just for that 200 or 300 metre stretch, the continuous bus corridor. Thanks.
It is actually very bad at the moment when you have a choice of going both ways, isn't that right?
The traffic currently goes both ways, that's right, Chair.
But the point is, I was there recently and I was held up for a huge amount of time, unexpectedly.
That wouldn't necessarily be the experience of most local people. I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, Chair.
Well, that's what happened to me.
You'd be taking the M1, surely?
I came in past the stadium there, and I was going straight down to the shopping centre, and I was held up for a long time there.
And when you, yeah, I was going to say, like, I mean, that's more to do often with people entering the shopping centre. Like I mentioned, there are.
But I was going down to the shopping centre.
Yeah,
and I was held up there.
So the one-way system is actually beyond that junction.
The case is that if you're going to send more cars one way only, it's going to increase the problems for everybody.
That's right. That's a potential problem, all right.
I'm supporting you in that.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that, Chair.
Now, I'm in your hands how we go from here. You're the only member standing, literally. So I have 3 people offering.
Member, I'm a substitute member.
You're a substitute member, fine, well, I'm happy to take
And I have only 2 questions.
That's okay.
One of them's for you, Chair.
But we take the substitute member first.
Proceed with a kind of a round.
Yeah, no. What I want to do is to try and keep everybody happy.
Yeah.
So, Deputy Short.
Thank you, Chairman.
You're very welcome.
You remember, I'm sure, earlier in the year when a number of us came in here to talk about the proposals in relation to the preferred route on Metro. And at that stage, a number of us expressed very strong views in relation to the whole Nafina proposal. And it was on the basis that, as local representatives, representing local residents, we knew that this just was not a runner. It would not work. And it was a flawed proposal. And I would say we're back in a similar situation now in relation to the proposal for the Swords Corridor in terms of its impact on the Swords Road between Shantalla Bridge and Omni Park Shopping Centre. Those of us who live in that area, who represent people living in that area, know that this cannot work. And, you know, there's a unanimous view across all of the residents' associations in that area that this cannot work because the impact of it will be so great on the movement of traffic that there can only be losers in this. There aren't any winners in what is being proposed here for people living in the greater Whitehall, Santry and Beaumont areas. And those impacts are enormous. Okay, there's impacts on business, first of all, in relation to Omni Park Shopping Centre, having only a left turn coming out of Omni Park Shopping Centre. We know as things stand, it is chaotic there at weekends. There are long tailbacks to get out, where there are currently 3 options, going right, left or straight. If you reduce that down to a single option of going left, that will cause chaos in the area. We also know that the Swords Road features every single day on AA Road Watch. There's no doubt about that. I listen out for it every morning, Morning Ireland. Every morning that features because of the difficulties in access there. And if you're proposing to divert a whole other load of traffic coming down that road, coming down and trying to access the Santry bypass, it's going to add enormously to the chaos that's there at the moment. The other thing, of course, is that there's a grave concern among residents living in the Shanrath, Shanbarna and Lorcan area, because that will undoubtedly become a rat run. People, you know, trying to avoid the traffic jams on the Santry bypass will undoubtedly come down the Swords Road and take a left turn into Lorcan to take to rat run down there to Shantalla Bridge. There's no way of stopping that other than banning traffic completely within that estate. And that's not possible. We also know that in relation to residents living in the Santry West area, people who currently come down along Shannon Road and take a right turn into town, that right turn will be banned under these plans. And they will be, all of those motorists will be forced back west onto Collins Avenue, which is currently chaotic because of the growth of DCU. So, I mean, traffic is almost at a standstill at the moment. What you're going to do if you proceed with these proposals is, you know, cause further chaos. So that cannot work. We also know that along that stretch, there are a number of small businesses along the Swords Road, and you're proposing to not only restrict passing traffic with those, but you're also proposing to take away virtually all of the on-street parking, which will kill those businesses. There's no question about that. So, look, we have to revisit this. We cannot proceed with the plan as proposed at the moment. It's a very short stretch in relation to that corridor, and that is causing the difficulties locally, and that has to be revisited. There's no doubt about that. And there are alternatives that you can look at. But creating a one-way system on that short stretch of the Swords Road is going to bung up the rest of the greater Whitehall, Santry and Beaumont area. So that has to be revisited. And what residents are concerned about is they don't want to be engaging in a system that is just a talking shop. They want to know that if they study the figures here, that if they get involved in it, they go along to the community forum, that they can actually have an impact on that. That it's not just, about tinkering with the proposals as they stand at the moment, that you are prepared to consider a radical change from what's on the cards at the moment, because that has to happen. The other thing that, people find it very hard to understand how it is that you've come up with those proposals, knowing, the likely impact where local people know that the likely impact of that will be to cause absolute chaos and make people prisoners in their own homes. And that's why the questions have been asked about what kind of underlying studies have you done on the base traffic figures that are there at the moment, and have you modelled the impact of a one-way system on that stretch of the Swords Road, and can we have access to those figures? If you can find a solution here and remove the current proposal, I think we have the possibility of reaching agreement on this corridor. But as things stand, it's just not a runner.
And I think that we made this point actually at a previous meeting as well. So on that point, I know that if we finish off with the questions.
I'll finish up very quickly.
Yeah,
the first question for you is Chair, is in relation to, I found this meeting very useful. It's been predominantly in relation to phase one, and each of the phases are equally as important as the impact on the city. So, Chair, I'd ask you to facilitate a meeting for phase 2 and 3, similar to this Transport Committee, to ensure that all parts of the city are treated in the same way. So that's the first question for yourself. For the NTA, I've just two questions for you, and if I didn't hear the original answer, because I think you partially answered the question earlier on, in relation to the projects you've undertaken, which are so important in relation to the city and to the sustainability of the city, sustainable transport, is the extra resources. So could you outline what are they? How much extra resources are you looking for, and when did you ask for those resources to be given to yourselves? And then on the second question is in relation to studies and models. When you talk about public transport or improving public transport or improving cycling, there's always a kind of a kickback in relation to the motorists, in relation to traders. They won't be going to come in and spend the money. Our business will be down substantially. Now, I'm aware of an old DIT study in relation to Dublin city centre that actually showed people that travel in public transport and cycle actually stayed in the city centre for a longer period and spent more money, and that the original kind of perception, you have to have a car to come into the city centre for the city centre to work. So I'm just wondering, have you available any modern studies in relation to spending power and additional businesses? Because it's always like you talk about a shopping centre, they'll be down in relation to business. It can actually be quite the opposite, and I'm just wondering, has those studies, have you access to studies that have been done to show in relation to the impact of loss of business or the gain of business when you improve public transport and cycling? That's all.
Just to answer the question you asked me, the answer is yes. We went out to visit, actually, as a committee, problems in the city here in terms of transport.
So you'll do phase 2 and 3? Yeah,
no, this is just in the initial phase in the metro. We went out to look at issues, so we're a very active committee. You'll be glad to hear.
No, absolutely accept that.
And just on that, if you would please just write into us for next week, because I have no problem and I would very much welcome.
Phase 2 and 3 hasn't been launched. I was asking you to do that.
I want to answer your question in the best way I can. Is that I can't decide what the committee will do, but I'd be very happy to support that we would do that. If you would just give us a note on that, even an email, because I think it's hugely important that we visit to see where the issues are, and indeed in relation to what the members and substitute members they have mentioned is the question out in Santry. If needs be, I think we should go there as a committee to see it, if there's still, but I know it's probably maybe looking at maps and getting another solution or looking at other options is essential, I think, at this stage. Unless Deputy Ellis wants to say anything else, then we
Yeah, no, I just wanted to just first off to agree with Roisin in regards to the Swords Road. And I mean, there's absolutely no doubt that while we have that problem there, and it's a major, major problem, and it's going to be very contentious, certainly Lorcan, Shanret and that, all these areas are going to end up rat runs if this was to go ahead. But this is only the first problem. We've got Hart's Corner. That's going to be probably even a bigger problem to solve. That's why I was saying that we should have addressed, before we went down these roads of going through massive consultations, we would have looked at all of these areas, seeing what could be done, see could we implement those and work on those, and see can we can get them up and running, and see what effects that would give us then in terms of the running of buses. Concentrate on those bottlenecks. And that's why I think we're running into major problems. And this is only the start of it, and we're going to continue running into it. The other question I want to ask you was that before all this process began, we had the Metro North on the table. We had all the consultation. The issue that you mentioned about the park and ride, that was all part of Metro North, where you're talking about up at the M50, right? What was the procedure in terms of talking to, say, the different departments? Did we not come along and say, look, it'd be far better if we pushed forward Metro North and got an earlier date to finish on than to go down this road? Because it takes something like 70,000 cars off the road a week. That's across the city. That's across the country. People coming in from every area. It's not just for the whole taking in Ballymun, taking in all that area right down along that route. This affects the whole city. And I just think we've jumped from one scheme onto another scheme, and whereas we should have concentrated. I'm trying to make.
You made that point well.
I'm just curious what arguments went on, or did arguments go on to push that instead of going down this route? I'm just curious about that. Yeah.
Okay. You start off.
Okay, Deputy Shorter gave a lot of questions there about Santry, as did Deputy Rock. We know how difficult Santry is. There is a problem for the bus system in Santry. It is very slow to get through that area there. We put a lot of work in to see what was the best thing to do, and we struggled to come up with a better solution than the one we have, and we don't underestimate the challenges of it. We don't have a plan B sitting in our pocket. We have thoughts about, could we add lane capacity on the section of road from Coolock Lane roundabout down to Shantala Bridge. We could possibly add a third lane on there to ease the, if we're putting extra traffic onto that link, it would ease the pressure on that link. But that still doesn't address the issues that it's one way only through Santry if this proposal went ahead. We would love to have another solution. I think you said there are alternatives. If there is an alternative that we can get the bus system working, not perfectly, but reasonably well through there, and still preserve what people want as well, we'd love to explore that. But genuinely, a lot of effort went into seeing what the various options were. What would we have to do to get a fourth lane in? None of them were very palatable. So the only thing we have in our back pocket, since it was asked, is the possibility of a third lane southbound on the Santry bypass between Coolock Lane and Shantala Bridge. And we haven't done a design, so we'd have to check it was technically possible. We'd have to get TI to say that they were okay with it, but that still may not be enough. We were very conscious of the Omni Centre when we were doing that, so you'll notice that you can get to the Omni Centre by all the routes that you currently can get to the Omni Centre. It's the exiting that's the issue. So the entrance to the centre remains the same. Exiting, people turn left. I know there is congestion there at the moment. Funny enough, I do think it would work better if they were only turning left coming out there. That's a small point, isn't it? It's called Comfort and Shopping Centre, but that junction would perform slightly better. But bottom line, if you mentioned there about the consultative forum and making it useful. If there are ideas that people can bring to that, and they do work, and it's up, it's up to us to develop it then. If we can get an alternative that does most of what we're trying to do now, and it works, great. We'd love to do it. I think that's probably all I can say on that.
Just the traffic modelling, isn't it?
Well, traffic modelling, there was some traffic modelling done a couple of years ago, but not enough to be able to make to be able to give it out in any usable format. On all our corridors, intention is we'll do traffic modelling at the next stage. We're putting our hands up and we say these interventions will cause extra traffic congestion to other routes. That's just a reality. We don't need a model to tell us that. We know that's going to be the reality. But at the next stage of the process, we will do the detailed transport modelling. We will issue it out to whoever wants it. There's no difficulty with that. We haven't got it at this stage.
Okay, but can you understand the views of local people where they're saying this proposal will result in lack of access to a number of residential areas, increased traffic chaos, and ultimately a weaker bus service? That's the problem. It'll be a poorer bus service than they have currently.
I think, Deputy, the point is, can I put a point to you?
Sorry,
you're talking about possible solutions, right? Would it be possible to arrange maybe, again, we're just thinking out loud, a meeting with deputies from the committee and other people might like to go along, and particularly deputies from the constituency, to talk about, because it's a huge issue. Could we do it?
Be happy to do that.
Outside of the committee itself, would that be possible to do? And then come back to this meeting afterwards, and that would, I think, obviously you'll be able to talk about it in every possible respect there without me having to be intervening as chairman. So if that's it, we'll adjourn.
Just want to respond.
Sorry, the question I asked about
why the metro, or why not the metro?
Why wasn't? What was the procedure in pushing?
Basically, we're coming off 10 years of underinvestment in public transport.
I understand. Yeah.
And all of these projects need to be done. That's the second reality.
They need to be done.
And Metro North, or Metro Link, while it's important, it actually is a corridor that only covers about 5% of the Dublin area. That's what the catchment area is, 5%. Roughly. A lot of users of it, but you still have 90 to 95% of Dublin that still need something better, rather than wait 10 years till Metrolink is finished and then start. So our view is absolutely Metrolink needs to proceed, but Bus Connect also needs to proceed.
Can I just make one final Mr. Chair? What the proposals that we're putting forward is about addressing the growing congestion in our city, and it's about trying to encourage more people to use public transport as part of their journeys, and that's about giving priority to public transport and sustainable transport, and it means then that the space isn't available for car users, and that does and possibly increases kind of journey times for those that use their car. But we have to start giving priority to the bus where we possibly can. And as we've always said, this is challenging and this causes impacts and can cause local impacts. But really we are about trying to improve sustainable transport and about improving bus priority. So we wouldn't be proposing something that was going to actually make it worse for buses. What we're about is making it better for buses, better for bus users, encourage more people to use bus and use other means of transport other than the car.
Just one point, it's not germane to the debate today as such, but there's increasing congestion on the M1. Whereas even when you're outside the city, regardless of the time of day, be it 6 a.m. or 10 p.m, and I travel frequently both those times, there's huge congestion. And looking at the possibility of additional lanes, say from the airport back up the northern direction, or there's huge congestion. Traffic is bumper to bumper. I say the average. The M1 is rapidly becoming a car park. Yeah. I'd say the average speed, if you can get it for me, I'd say is somewhere around 70, 80 kilometres per hour now, regardless of the time of day almost. It's just unbelievable.
Again, we would say, as we put forward the transport strategy, the strategy really is about getting more people to use sustainable transport. Yeah, but we need to radically improve the sustainable transport and our public transport in order to be able to encourage more people to use it for their journeys.
What would this committee need to do? How can we help advance that.
To support all the projects that we're putting forward for you.
But all due respect, if you're taking buses out of residential areas, you're forcing people into cars.
Okay, well, can we have an answer to those two questions quickly? Because I have another meeting at 3:30, unfortunately.
Oh, the resources, sorry. So we've put forward a request for additional 26 staff for the NTA for 2018, for 2019. I'm not sure of the number, but a similar number for 2020. At the same time, we as an organisation also use consultants and other service providers to assist us in delivering kind of projects as well. So we call on those resources too, if we need to assist us in any aspect of our
And when did you ask for the staff?
I think in the summer of this year.
And just then the other thing in relation to studies, if you had it, you could share with us.
On the business.
We did a piece of work in Dublin City Centre about 2 years ago to identify what people's spend was by mode of transport. Car was only about 20% of the people who were spending in it.
Would it save you time? Could you send a study on to us?
Certainly,
if you could?
Indeed.
Be helpful.
Okay.
In relation to the city centre. Just so
No, but you can actually
extrapolate.
Extrapolate out.
Okay, I'd like to, as next week's meeting has now been scheduled to discuss committee business, our work that is our work programme. As is, we will have no witnesses. We may be required to advise the clerk on procedural matters. I propose that we convene next week's meeting in private session at 10 a.m. Is that agreed? The joint committee is now adjourned to the 19th December at 10 a.m. Thank you. Oh, sorry.